till World War I. The winners began to carve up the Ottoman Empire, and the Kurds were promised a separate homeland. But when the borders of modern Turkey and its neighbors were drawn, there was no more talk of an independent Kurdistan. Since then, Kurds have been a minority in every country they live in. One of these countries is Iraq.
لماذا قرار الاستفتاء؟ لأنه فشلت كل المحاولات السابقة.
Iraqi Kurds are constitutionally a part of the country, but they function as a semi-autonomous entity. They have their own parliament and their own armed forces, the Peshmerga, who have been at the forefront of the fight against ISIL. In fact, they've proven to be better fighters than the Iraqi army itself. For example, in 2014, the Iraqi army fled and ISIL attacked in Mosul, while Peshmerga fighters stood their ground. Iraq's Kurdish region also occupies parts of the country that are bursting with oil and gas. The Kurds sell these resources pretty much independently of Baghdad. So virtually a state within a state, but with aspirations for a truly independent state separate from Iraq. Naturally, the Iraqi government isn't thrilled.
والله من يعلن عن هذا يتحمل مسؤولية إعلانه. من السهل أن تعلن ما تريد، بس ليس بنفس الدرجة من السهولة أن تطبق ما تريد.
Nor are the other countries with a Kurdish minority.
Yaptığı açıklama bana göre hakikaten çok yanlış bir açıklama. Çünkü bizim yıllardır Irak'ın toprak bütünlüğü konusundaki hassasiyetimizi biliyoruz.
Even the US, which has so far armed Peshmerga fighters, doesn't want an independent Kurdistan. The fear is a domino. A free Kurdistan in Iraq means calls for Kurdish independence in Turkey, Syria, Iran, and Armenia. That could possibly mean redrawing borders, loss of territory, and of course oil revenue, among many other complications. None of these countries want that. They're also afraid that if they give independence to one ethnic minority, demands from others could be next. Meanwhile, the Kurds ask, how is that our problem?
Okay, I don't know if you were able to hear that entire video. It was an Al Jazeera summary of some issues related to the referendum. So now you can, of course, correct me if this data is on this sheet of paper is incorrect, but the referendum did take place, and the turnout was 72.6% of registered voters, 3.3 million out of 4.5 million occupants of the region, including non-Kurds. 92% said yes, and this was according to the to a BBC report. So I'm actually I teach here at the University of Bridgeport in Islamic and Middle East Studies. And I teach particularly a class on political economy of the Middle East, North Africa. And so, and I also traveled to Kurdistan. I went to Erbil in April of 2014. I was there for an academic conference, and at the university, which now I've forgotten which one. I think it's the University of Salahuddin, is that right?
That's right, yeah, the main one there.
And my experience, briefly, is that one of the things that struck me when I went there, of course this was 2 months before ISIS conquered Mosul, was that there was a rapidly developing infrastructure in Erbil, at least, right? Newly paved roads, a lot of new buildings, high-rises being built. There was a visible presence of military, of Kurdish military, and there was, and I thought this was maybe the most important thing, was there was an international airport in Erbil, and there was a separate passport control for the Kurdish regional government. In other words, the stamp on my passport isn't from Baghdad. It's from the Kurdish regional government. It specifically says that on the stamp. And there was a separate kind of security procedure where when we left the airport, we had to have our vehicle, get out of the vehicles and have them checked by security forces several miles outside of the airport before we entered Erbil city, and vice versa. So if you were traveling to that region as somebody that didn't know anything about the history or the politics of the region, your sense as a foreigner entering that would be that you were entering a country. Right? Now that's the thing that's kind of a thing that struck me. And the other thing I'll say as a little anecdote was I actually had a chance to meet Masoud Barzani because as part of the group that was at this conference, they took a number of us to his qasr, his palace, his White House, his equivalent of the White House. It's a massive building, and you saw the one woman in the video entering, and he was greeting her outside, and we were greeted in the same way, and then you go in, and you sit down, and there's a room, where they serve tea, and then he comes in and sits with you and speaks for a few moments, and then you say, thank you very much, and you leave in large black SUVs. But it was a very interesting experience because while I was there, this was again 3.5 years ago, he was talking to us briefly as this kind of delegation of academics from almost everyone except for myself was from the region. And he was talking to us about how much criticism he had of the Baghdad government for mishandling the aftermath of the Iraq War, and he criticized the American government for mishandling and so on. And it was clear to me, at least my reading of that conversation, was that he was positioning himself as this sort of bright light in an otherwise corrupt and dysfunctional environment in Iraq. But that's, again, my perception of the conversation. So without any more from me, I want to introduce you to our main speaker. This is Awesar Abid. Maybe I don't have your full biography in front of me, so perhaps you can go ahead and do a self-introduction for our group.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for this opportunity. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, my name is Awesar Abid. I am originally from Halabja. I was born in Halabja. But since 1988, when Halabja town came under an attack by former Iraqi regime of Saddam Hussein by chemical weapon, we fled the country to Iran as refugees. Then when we came back a year after, we were living in Suleimania. As we say Suli in US or UK. And I am currently a PhD researcher in my second year of Civil and Structural Engineering department at University of Bradford in UK. I have lived in the UK for more than 15 years, so I am a British citizen now. I want to go back to the brief introduction that you mentioned of the data. When it comes to data, we all know there is no precise data in election or referendum whatsoever. I believe it was more than 75% of people who participated, not 72. and it was not 3.3 out of 4.5 million, because we have around 6 million people in Kurdistan region, including Kirkuk now. Still, the Iraqi government does not admit Kirkuk as part of the Kurdistan region. This has been a very, very long-term problem between Kurds and non-Kurds in the region. As you know, Kirkuk is very well known for its oil, a very rich city in the world. And the Kurdish people are keen to have Kirkuk as part of Kurdistan region. As you mentioned, you was there in 2014, before ISIS come to attack Mosul. Back in them days, everything was really good. As you mentioned, we were booming economically, especially in the Kurdistan region. As you saw, there was a lot of construction projects, highways, buildings, tunnels, bridges, dams, and all this were taking place. The question is, we don't know why ISIS got involved with Kurdistan region. At the first, they had problems with Nouri al-Maliki, at the time when Nouri al-Maliki was the Prime Minister of Iraq. It was more like a chaos between Sunni and Shia. But then somehow we got involved in this war. When I say we got involved, I mean the Kurds got involved with this unwanted war. But we could more or less vanish ISIS on daily basis. As you saw, our Kurdish women fighters bravely stood up and fighting against the ISIS. Everywhere I go, I proudly say Kurdish women have represented all women on this planet for their bravery and their important role against the ISIS. Coming back to, you mentioned that you met Masoud Barzani in a conference. At the time, Masoud Barzani was obviously the president of Kurdistan region. But then the year after, his presidency were running out by the parliament, the Kurdish parliament. But because of the ISIS war, we couldn't go to election. We couldn't vote for a new parliament. He kept going on. Up to a couple of weeks ago, not a couple of weeks actually, a week more or less, when we went ahead with the referendum for the first time in our history. There are a lot of issues and questions raised on this referendum. So whether, if you want me to carry on or you want to stop me to ask me the questions.
Well, let's see. Yeah, it's kind of more going to be, so we originally thought we would have two, so we're going to have more of a conversation, but I'll try to cover and try to leave enough time for them to ask questions as well. But the first, I guess, question, I mean, you addressed some of your perspective on the events that have happened, but one of the questions that we all created, or the group here created, was regarding, and I don't know if you're willing to answer this or not, I hope you are, but what would you have voted in the referendum and why? And what is your opinion on the next steps now that the referendum has taken place?
This is a very crucial question for every single Kurd, inside and outside of Kurdistan. You know, if you ask any Kurd, they will say, yes, I vote for an independent state. Yes, I vote to have my own right. Yes, I vote to have my own everything. When we say everything, it includes your own language to be used in educating your kids, your own traditional, your own costume, your own food, your own history, your own religion beliefs, your own everything. The principles that will describe a nation. But then there were some critics of the current situation. Why did we get involved with the ISIS? Why did we went to war against the ISIS? The ISIS war wasn't against the Kurds. Why did we go involved in this in the first place? So this raised a lot of issues and questions, whether if all the Kurds have one vote to go for the referendum and vote yes, or whether there were some critics, as I mentioned, that they were against the referendum. They were even running a campaign under the name of No for Referendum at this time. That was the title of the campaign, was saying no for a referendum at this time. So I think it was around 7% more or less voted no. Otherwise, more than 92% of the Kurds voted yes for independence. My question is, for any Kurd, will you vote to have your own country, even if you are struggling and having a lot of chaos in the region that includes Syria, Iraq, Iran, and Turkey? Because it's very complicated, as you see on the news. There is a lot of chaos going on in the region. The answer will be yes. Even if they don't agree with what's going on, they still vote yes. But what are the consequences? Can we deal with the consequences? As you see today and yesterday, the Turkish President Erdogan and also President of Iran, Rouhani, they met and they discussed this referendum. They also declared that this referendum was all set and planned by US and Israel to support the Kurds and have their own state in the region. This will be a threat on Turkey and Iran's security. Okay, this is another issue. But coming back to the main issue is, we are in a war against ISIS. And this war is still on, taking a long, long time to vanish and take out all the ISIS in the region. Still, nearby Kirkuk, which is only 2 hours away from my hometown and where I live in Suleymaniye, there are a lot of ISIS in war against Peshmerga. Peshmerga is our Kurdish military army, just to clarify for the respected audience if they have a question about the name. So everything is just messed up, basically, you know, like just days after the referendum, Iraqi government decided to close down all the airlines with Suleymaniye and Erbil airports. As you mentioned, you was there, you've seen the airports. I'm presumably thinking you also traveled through one of those airports when you was in Erbil. But unfortunately now we can't use it except for internal flights between Erbil to Najaf or Baghdad or Basra, which is in south of Iran. And after MPs in parliament, Iraqi parliament in Baghdad. If you voted for the referendum, then we will withdraw you from the Iraqi parliament. I mean, what they've done is just not what we say logically, politically is correct. They say we want to punish only the Kurdish government, but they've already punished the Kurdish people since 2014 when the ISIS came. If you ask me how, I will explain to you by cutting the wages, salaries of every single teacher, doctor, engineer, solicitor, anyone who is working in the governmental sector. But if you are going to punish the Kurdish people in this way, then you cannot say these people are your people. I am sorry, but you can't say the Kurdish people are your people if you are going to punish them and cut their salaries, cut their medicine, cut their food, and punish them and basically put in sanction on them. This is what the Iraqi government says. When they come on the media, they say, well, the Kurdish people and Kurdistan region are part of Iraq, are part of our nation. The Kurdish people and the Arabs always been as brothers. Yes, we always respect that because we have no any issues with the people whatsoever. The issues we have is with the policy, with the government itself. Like they say they have problems with the Kurdish government, then if you have problem with the Kurdish government, then you should not punish the people. It's been about 3 years now. They are not sending any salaries. Do you know, since ISIS came and they attacked the Muslims, still they were getting their salaries from the Iraqi government? I don't think you know that. But they cut the salaries from the Kurdish region. This is really surprising. I mean, the ISIS were attacking Iraqi government, Iraqi army, killing innocents and civilians, but at the same time, they were getting their salaries because obviously the territory and Mosul is part of the Iraqi government. They never cut it, they never stopped the salaries, but they stopped the salaries from the Kurdistan region because Kurdistan region was saying, we are going to send the oil directly to Turkey and sell it to other neighborhoods in the region. We're not going to share whatever it is, let's say the taking, the income with the Iraqi government. For this reason, Iraqi government was not going to negotiate with the Kurdish government, and they started to punish the people. This is maybe some of the audience have a question saying, well, Iraqi government do have a point by cutting this, let's say, this kind of contract between the central government of Iraq and the Kurdish region, because the Kurdistan government are not willing to share the outcome and the income of the oil contracts. So why should the Iraqi government send the salaries to the Kurdish people? If Kurdistan government selling the oil, then they should pay the salaries to its own people. Is that right? Does that make sense? But after all, I still say, the Iraqi government should not punish Kurdish people if they are keen of classing the Kurdish people as their own people. But they didn't. This is why I think the time for the referendum was the right time. I actually think personally the time of this referendum is very late. We should have done this in 2008 when Iraqi army came so close to attack Kurdistan region area nearby Kirkuk, because Kirkuk is a very well-known city and rich with oil. We should have done the referendum in 2008, but because of the chaos we had, the conflict inside Iraq, it was only a few years after Saddam Hussein's government was terminated, and there was a lot of militia groups in Iraq. There was a lot of suicide bombing going on, the troubles between Sunni and Shia, the troubles between Arabs and Kurds, the troubles between Turkmens, we say the Turkish and the Yazidis and all these other ethnicity. We couldn't go ahead with the referendum in 2008. Otherwise, we would have done it in 2008. I think personally it is too late even now we're doing the referendum. I mean, if we are not going to do a referendum anytime sooner, this year or maybe next year, when is the right time for the Kurdish people to do a referendum? When is the right time for the Kurdish people to ask to have their own country? When is the right time for the Kurdish people to ask to have their own right, not to be slaughtered, murdered, attacked by chemical weapons, ended up by having more than 4,000 or 5,000 villages burned down to the ground, genocide, and so on. When is the right time for the Kurdish people to have a referendum and ask for their own independence? I mean, we as Kurdish people don't need to ask anyone for our own independence. We don't need to ask any country to give us permission to have our own country. Because this is our right. This is our right, like everybody else, every other nations on the planet, to have a country. God never drew any map. God never created any map. God never created the map of the US, UK, Germany, Turkey. Who did this map? It's us, it's me, it's you, it's the humankind who came and lived on this planet, and we came up with having the country, the state, and drawing the map. This is our land, this is our map. If this is the humankind problems that they came up with this idea, then they should agree to people like Kurds have their own state. Turkish and the Iranian government always use the religion for their excuse by saying, well, the Kurdish people are our brothers, beloved allies, they can live with us, we all are Muslims, we can live together, we can stay together. But if they want to have their own country, it's not allowed, even it's not allowing religion. There is no such a thing in religion says that. It's actually the other way around. Every single religion came to humankind, says you can go and live together to know each other. It doesn't say you can stop other nations to have their own rights. Stop them not to educate their kids in their own language. Do you know up to now in Turkey and Iraq, our Kurdish kids are not allowed to educate in Kurdish? Why? They have been forced to educate the kids in Turkish, in Turkey, in Persian, in Iran. God never says this. God even not happy with this.
So,
what we do.
I have to interrupt you because I want to ask you some questions
Yeah.
about what you just said. Well, the first question is that, well, it's more of a statement, which is we're not talking about Kurdish community in Turkey or in Iran. We're talking about Iraqi Kurdistan. So, in Iraqi Kurdistan, there was education in Kurdish, and there is to this day, since the post-2003 era. There is an ability for, as far as I understand it, from those that I know and talk to, a lot of the younger generation of Kurds in Iraq barely know Arabic. They know Kurdish. So that indicates that there is, on the ground, despite the fact that there's no state, there's no nation state of Kurdistan in Iraq yet. There's a lot of the things that you were alluding to, the right for language education, the right to preserve your cultural and historical heritage, the right to police the borders. A lot of that by de facto was already there. So the question is, still, is this, what is the benefit of the referendum, in terms of not just the benefit, but what is the end game? In other words, what are we going to see happen now, right? Because there is the Iraqi Kurds currently have a significantly higher level of autonomy than any of the other Kurdish groups, with possibly the exception of some enclaves in Syria now, only in the last 3 years. So are we looking at, and the second kind of a related comment and question to this is, I believe you're correct that nations are created by humans, right? But one of the processes by which the U.S. was created and Turkey was created was through warfare, right? Through a series of wars. In other words, Ataturk had to fight a war of independence to defend the borders of the modern state of Turkey against his enemies that desired to tear it apart. So, can we stand here tonight and talk about an independent Kurdistan without talking about war? I guess that's the big kind of question. So where do we go from here, and are we talking about facing a war of independence? What do you like? That's kind of the opinion of the questions.
Okay, this is not only in this small audience we are raising this question that you mentioned, independence and referendum in Kurdistan of Iraq is to do with Iraq. This has been a question raised in many conferences, in many discussions. And I am going to tell you, actually, this referendum is to do with Iran and Turkey. Otherwise, we have been having a very small autonomous region in Iraq. Even when Saddam Hussein in 1991 failed against the famous uprising by the Kurds. And obviously that was just a year after when he invaded Kuwait in 1990, and the US attacked the Iraqi army, and they lost, let's say, more than thousands of soldiers and hundreds of tanks and so on. Going back to what you just mentioned, this referendum on independence has to do with Iran and Turkey. Because in Iraq and Syria, before even we do a referendum, we fought for the areas that has been controlled by Iraqi and Syrian government. And now they are controlled under Kurdish forces. Kurdish forces in Iraq called Peshmerga. Kurdish forces in Syria, we have many of them. The famous, well-known Kurdish forces in Syria are YPG. So when we mention about war, we didn't need to do war to have a referendum. Even without a referendum, in Syria and Iraq, we still already have a small government, a small parliament, a small army, a small everything. But the main problem is Iran and Turkey, because the Kurds are suffering in Iran and Turkey. We don't see it on the media, of course. We don't know what's going on, because Turkey government or Iran government are not allowing any journalists or the media channels to go and see or investigate and see for themselves what's going on in the region. But it's a shame. It's a shame we are living in 2017. We still see human in front of a big crowd. They hang them in Iraq. You've seen it. They hang these Kurds by crane in front of a crowd. Is this a humanity we come to in 2017 in an Islamic country like Iran? Is this Islamic country? Is this really a religion? I mean, you're telling me, you're saying that let's concentrate on one topic. But how can we concentrate on one topic when it has to do with everything else? how can we concentrate on the referendum of only Kurdistan of Iraq when this is actually a point of starting point to Kurdistan of Iran and Turkey? Why do you think yesterday and today Iranian and Turkish officials and seniors are in a meeting? Why? Why do you think they've done this? Because they know what is coming next. That's why they're blaming US and Israel for this plan. They're saying, well, they want to create a small government called Kurdistan. It will be a threat on us, and this is to do with Israel, this is to do with US. But this is on one side. Coming back to your point, you said we concentrate on the independence and referendum of only Kurdistan of Iraq because our topic today is only about this circle. Let's not go out of the circle, but obviously Iraqi Kurdistan, like you mentioned, they had their own rights. Even Saddam Hussein was in power. They were educating their kids in Kurdish. They had their own principles of the Kurdish nation and all meaning. But you mentioned that I said nations were created by humans. No, I said nations were created by God, but the countries and map of countries were created by human, which is wrong. We as human should not threat other nations around us and forcing them to what we like to do. Yes, I agree with you. There are nations who ended up in war, and they gave a lot of bloodshed, and they finally managed to have their own independence. I respect that. But if you point in this kind of freedom, independence, or own state of a nation through a war, then Kurdish people are not far away from this, because we fought for this many years. We fought for this even before Iraq became a country. Before in 1921, Iraq became a country. We as Kurdish people fought. It was many years ago when we were in a war between the Ottoman Empire and the Persian Empire. But unfortunately, in a war called Chalderan War, the Iranian and Turkey, at the time it was the Persian Empire and the Ottoman Empire, came up with a plan. They decided to invade Kurdistan and divided it to two main parts. Up to now, this is the main problem. Otherwise, in Iraq and Syria, there is only small part of Kurdistan. There is only small population of Kurdish people live in Iraqi and Syrian Kurdistan. The main problem is to do with Iran and Turkey. This is why I'm trying to say we need to expand the circle. We need to expand the circle, not to just concentrate on the independent or referendum of the Kurdistan in Iraq. This is absolutely to do with Iran and Turkey. And it has been a big issue for a long time. And it will be.
Well, that was great. Thank you so much. And what I'm going to do is now I'm going to open it up to the audience. I think we pretty much at least covered the contours of the issue, but I'm sure there's a lot more detailed questions that they'll have for you about various aspects of this issue. So thank you so much for that kind of introductory part. Let's go ahead and take questions from the audience. So who is first? Daniel?
Sure.
And let me know if you can hear him or if I need to repeat it.
Okay.
I'll try to speak loudly, okay?
Yeah. I don't know if you can hear me. My name is Daniel. Thank you so much for speaking at such a late time for us. My question would be, you've talked about the various ways in which Kurdistan has stood up for itself in the past and has a legitimate, perhaps, claim to having its own nation, and even has many elements of a nation already on its own. But what do you think will be the practical concerns in securing this for them in the future? Do you think that it's possible for the Kurds to overcome the current opposition from their neighbors in forming their own state? Do you think that it's a realistic thing to have referendums on their independence? And will it potentially cause negative effects for the people who actually desire that independence?
Shall I take all the questions individually, or I can answer one by one?
I would say just go ahead and answer it, and then just try
That'll
to
be easier.
try to limit your answer to a few minutes. Just I know it's hard with all the
Yeah,
but
this is a very, very good question. As I mentioned, we fought in the past, and we failed because in 70s in Algeria, Saddam Hussein and Shah of Iran agreed to end the conflict, but as long as they both denied the Kurdish rights, and they did it. So we failed, and they sold us out. That was just an example, by the way, because if we're going back to years and years ago, we have done it and done it, and then again, we have been sold out by the neighbors. The main problem for the Kurdish people and Kurdistan in general, we are unfortunately located among Iran, one different nation. Iraq and Syria are completely another different nation. And Turkey, again, they are a different nation. I mean, it's very complicated if we have a deal with one nation and then the other nations are going to agree on the basis as well. So it's very complicated. So your question is, what is the guarantee after this referendum on independence that we have that, again, we not go to give away what we have achieved for the past more than, let's say, 25 years? My answer will be is to do with international law, the United Nations, the US policy, Israel itself. They promised the Kurdish officials if they go ahead with this referendum, they will back them up. Up to now, US have not been straightforward with us. They are not admitted. I don't know, I mean, like, whether if they going to agree in the dark rooms on the table, and then when they come on the media, they say, well, we are still friends with Turkey or Iran, and we respect the border of those countries. We don't know. I mean, my answer will be, if we don't get help by the international countries, or let's say the most powerful country, well, Russia, US, and the other European countries, if we don't get support and help by these countries, then we are in a chaos. We are already in a chaos. As I mentioned earlier, they are punishing us on a daily basis. They're closing down the airports, they're not sending medicines, they're not sending food, they're not even allowing to have food from other countries, other neighborhood countries, because we are, we surrounded by these countries. So that was the answer for your question.
okay. Next question, all the way in the back. You have to speak loud. So.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Iramu. So I'd like to ask. You said.
Can you come closer? I think he can't hear you.
Yeah, just to be sure.
You said that there were Kurds in Iran, Iraq, and Turkey. So it's everywhere has its own tradition or culture. When they come together, do you think it's going to cause a problem with Kurdistan as it wants to become a sovereign state?
this is a good question. Look, as a nation, as people, we don't have no problem with Turkish people or Iranian people. We don't have problems with the Iraqi people or Syrian people. We live with the Iraqi people for many, many years, up to now. Even after the referendum, as you see, we still have the Iraqi flag in our parliament, and we have not even declared any independence yet. Same in Turkey, in Iran. We as nation, as people, have no problem whatsoever with other peoples, or bring in cultures, or have interaction, and to live together in peace. But the main problem is the policy, the government, the people who are running the government. I told you, like a couple of months ago, Iran and Turkey have not any close relationship, because they are two different countries. Iran are Shia, Turkey are Sunni, if we talk about religious conflict. Iran do have problem when it comes to international, like US and Russia. Turkey do have other issues. But when it comes to the Kurdish issues, they all become friends. They all become brothers. They all have one opinion of stopping Kurds having their own country, stopping Kurds having their own state, stopping Kurds to have any right as a nation. Why? This is the question. Why? Why not? What's the difference between
I think you
Kurdish
misunderstood
people
the
and others?
question.
I think that she actually was asking more of a question about, if I didn't misunderstand it, about cultural or internal differences amongst the Kurds, between the Syrian Kurds, the Turkish Kurds, the Iranian Kurds, and the Iraqi Kurds. If there was such a thing as a united Kurdistan between those four communities, and I would add on to that question, what about political differences in terms of ideology and leadership between those four groups? How is that going to be reconciled?
This is very good question. I thought she's talking about Kurdish with other nations, our neighbors. But you corrected the question. Sorry, I was misunderstanding the question. She means internal. This is very, very good question, because we have issues. We have problems between the Kurds of Iran with Turkey, Turkey with Syria, Syria with Iraq. We had civil war in 1994 up to 1996, 2 years, even in one region, Kurdistan of Iran. And that was again supported by Iran and Iraq. Iran was supporting PUK, was led by Jalal Talabani. Sadly, he passed away yesterday. He was a very well known, famous Kurdish leader and former Iraqi president. And then Iraqi government at the time was helping Masoud Barzani. He is the leader of PDK and currently still he is, and president of the Kurdistan region. Going back to the question, yes, we do have conflicts, we do have problems. For me personally, if you ask me, how are we going to handle one large, independent, united Kurdistan, I would say it will be very difficult. It will take years and years and years to have a united Kurdistan. This has been a common problem anyway. I'm living in UK, and just 1 or 2 years ago, we had a referendum if Scotland wants to declare independence, but then they voted to stay within the UK. 51% and more, they voted to stay. It has always been difficult to have a united large country when it comes to internal conflict, especially if you have a different dialect, if you have a different tradition, if you have, it doesn't matter if all the people are Kurdish, but still we have completely different dialects and principles when it comes to a nation, to be honest with you. So it's quite difficult to have one large, independent, united Kurdistan. Any soon anyway. So I don't know what's going to happen in the future, or what's going to look like when the new generation are more educated and they can work together and closely. So for this time, I think it's going to be difficult because our neighbors not helping at all. If we have a united large Kurdistan, then Turkey will be supporting its own Kurds to attack us, and Iraq will help us to attack the Kurds in Turkey, and Iran will help the Kurds in Iran to attack us. So it's going to be a chaos. It's very difficult, to be honest with you, to say, yes, we could have a very successful, large, independent, united Kurdistan at this time.
So sorry, I have a follow-up question.
Okay.
So do you think it's worth it for the Kurds to actually amalgamate if this is going to cause more problems?
Look, we have problems already. We had problems in the past. We have been through a lot. We suffered a lot. We experienced everything. And we have been dealt by a government, another government, and another government after each other very differently. When Saddam was in power, he punished us. When Saddam terminated, the new government came into power, they punished us. And they obviously finished their rule. Then the new election and parliament again came into power. Now they are punishing us. When I say punishing, it's not about just attacking or war or killing. One of the punishing category they use now is not, they're not sending any medicines to Kurdistan region. They're not sending no food. They're not allowing anyone to send food into Kurdistan. They're closing down all the flights. What more do you want? So it will be worth it if we had a chance by the support of US and Israel or any country. Look, we came to a point, really, this is a very common word, I say this to you now. We don't care who's going to help us, as long as we have our own independent country. Does that make sense?
Thank you, yes.
And we think it's going to be worth it.
So let's take another question. Who else has questions?
Mayank.
Yes, over here. I don't know if you can see him. Hold on, let me try to move this slightly. Now can you see him?
Mayank, can you come closer?
Yeah, why don't you come down here? He'll come to the middle here a little more.
Why? See, this is what I mean by humans. Why is not sitting in the audience?
No, you can't. You can't see the audience. The audience is also in the other two parts, so you can't see.
If you can't manage to have one united class, then how can you expect us to have one united Kurdistan?
Well, Doha tried her best, but she wasn't a dictator, you know. So.
Well, you just
asked.
You said my same question which I was about to ask here. You guys have a different ideology, everybody. Some say US should support us, some say Iran should support us, some say Israel should support us. Kurdistan is itself so divided. How will you unite a country which is already so divided? And if you give them independence, again, it's going to be ready on the verge to get further divided because they are not united already. So you just asked said my same question which I was about to ask you, and thank you for being us here. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, this question, how can you unite a very complex Kurdistan when it is already divided many, many years ago and it has still the same problem? Well, the answer is not going to be easy. It's going to take time. We're going to have to work hard for it. We're going to have to sit down on the table and negotiate. At this moment of time, I don't know if you've seen on the news, there are delegates from US and Israel are talking with the Kurdish forces of Iranian Kurdistan. So we know it will be a war. It will be a war sooner or later. And this war will not be in our favor. Because if there is a war in the Kurdistan region of Iran, then that means the plan, it will be against the Iranian government. It is time for them to end this rule, like we've seen it in the famous Arab uprising when it took place in Tunisia, in Libya, in Syria, in some other countries like Egypt and so on. So, coming back to the question, it's not going to be easy to unite this complex Kurdistan when it is already divided and we have a lot of chaos and conflict inside the country. But only thing we can do, if we sit down and work so hard, when the right time comes, it could be 10 years, it could be more than 10 years, we don't know. We just have to work hard for it. Otherwise, the neighbors are not going to make it easy for us. Iran will help its courts, as I said, against us. Turkey do the same, Iraq do the same. So it will be very complex.
Other questions?
I have like an opinion to talk about. So, hi, my name is Muhammad. So don't you think that with the emergence of ISIS and the weakening of Iraq and Syria, and then you see how America, they helped with military, the Kurds, and we can't forget that Kurdistan is are like allies for decades with Israel. Don't you think that they are already backed up? And then when you talk that, when you say that about Turkey and Iran, you have roughly 15 to 20% in each country are Kurds. So if you make a country, if a country emerges in Iraq, won't that like build emotions so that these people, these nations in these countries like join that country and make it bigger, to make a full like
that's the aim.
a bigger Kurdish nation? I mean, that's I presume that's their main concern, these countries. That's why they're talking to each other, are becoming more friendly. That's one thing. And so when you say that you want that, let's say here in the United States, when people migrated, let's say from Ireland, millions of them are here, let's say in Northern America. They say now we want to implement our traditions, we want to gather up, and we want our own country here in America. That's the same thing. Like the people that are in Turkey and whatever, they went there as refugees or migrated, and now you want them to become one country. And so that's and also like one last point, when you say that also the main concern is that when you have two strong countries in that region, that one of them, like, let's say Turkey, is not so friendly lately with the U.S. and Iran, they are not friends at all with the U.S. So to put them in a weak position, you plant a small a minority, a country, a minority that is strong, and that's an enemy for them both. And that's why they are afraid that America and Israel are putting that country there for them. What do you think about that?
Look, I mean, if we have not been given any promise, we wouldn't take no risk. You know that. We know we have been given promise. We know U.S. will help us. We know that U.S. are not good friends with Iran at all. Even Turkey, somehow they've changed their direction towards the U.S. Politics. And now you see Turkey are more friendly with Russia than U.S. And let's not forget, we have gas and oil in Kurdistan. This is why we have been supported by US when you mentioned that US will give us weapons and help us in respect of military against ISIS and so on. This is a very, very well set plan by US and Russia. Because at the moment you see Russia are providing gas to Europe. But every time when they have their own terms and conditions, they will threat Europe. And Europe doesn't like this. So what shall we do? We have another alternative. We can have Kurdistan as a region, make a deal with them. They give us the gas. We don't need to beg Russia anymore. Or we can negotiate with Russia, and also Kurdistan gas will come through Russia to Europe. And who's going to lead this process? Of course, it will be US. And who's not in favor of this plan is Iran and Turkey, because they are missing out. They also have a right to ask for their own share, because these gas pipelines and oil pipelines from Kurdistan are, some of them are going through Iran, some of them are going through Turkey. Right? So this is all comes down to economy. We say politics without economy or economy without politics will not complete. So both of them completing in one equation. So everything going on around the world is to do with economy. Do you agree with me?
Yes.
Now, going back to your question, yes, we are very small minority in the region against very strong governments such as Turkey or let's say Iran. I say strong because you mentioned that they are strong, but I will not say they are strong when it comes to international law, international countries, and especially when it comes to Europe and the US. Turkey already disappointed with Europe. They will never ever get a membership in the European Union, right? So what shall they do? They will stick with the region, the neighbors, to do business. Iran, they already have a problem. They are also suffering from the sanctions by US. So what's the plan for them? What shall they do? They will still stick with the neighborhood in the region. So this has been going on, and the only thing we can say, if we as Kurdish people do good business with Europe, then US will help us. Because right now we have managed somehow to reach the port, the sea level, nearby Lebanon, if you come back towards Syria, because that's the Kurdish region, isn't it? Right? If they are going to close down everything on us, we can still manage to do business somehow through this port, which reaches nearby Israel, Lebanon, and so on.
Okay. We can have final remark
Yeah,
or
final-
final question.
Well, maybe what we can do is, we're pretty much, we've held you on here for over an hour, so we want to be respectful of your time, but...
It's fine, I don't mind. I'm trying to just talk about everything going on around this region.
The one thing I would say that was interesting, I observed as kind of like a final observation for myself is, and maybe you can say a few final words after that, but is that most of your discussion about the Kurds and Kurdistan didn't really, or very rarely mention Syria. And I thought that was interesting, and the reason I say that is because Syria is the other region where the Kurds have currently have a significant amount of autonomy and aren't attacked by the Syrian regime, but that is just a temporary historical moment. The Syrian regime stripped the Kurds of their citizenship in the 1960s and didn't restore it till much, much later, and carried out a number of vicious attacks on Kurdish villages in the early 2000s before the ISIS war happened. So I would say that that's kind of an added precarious, complicated aspect of the issue, but that's just my kind of final comment, is that, you know, that's one piece to the puzzle that we also probably, obviously we can't really talk about that tonight, but it's just to add on to your point that it's a very complicated, let's say it's a fairly hostile neighborhood for the Kurds.
Yeah, I agree with you.
And it's not just Turkey, Iran, and the Iraqi government. Certainly the Syrian government is just, I would imagine they're just biding their time until they can deal with the other dissent and then turn their attention to the Kurds. So that's my kind of final comment. Maybe you can say a few last words about it.
Up to the war in Syria, Kurdish people were not even number 2 citizen in the country. As you mentioned, they were not allowed to travel, they had no passports, they were not having no any rights whatsoever. I mean, in the 80s, they wanted to uprise, and then in very bad way of dealing with the whole situation. Syrian government killed many Kurds. They never wanted to obviously have the Kurds marching and asking for their own rights in demonstrations whatsoever ever since. And then when this war started, things were changing. The reason why I didn't mention more about the Syrian Kurdistan is because it's done now. We have control of the Kurdistan region, and this will not going to be easy handed back to Syria again. Because in the beginning of the speech tonight, you mentioned a very crucial point. You said some nations got their own right and said what they wanted through war, and I respect that. We have pretty much done the same in the Kurdistan of Iraq and Syria. So lately, this is what happened in Kurdistan of Syria. We've done the same thing. It will be no more united Syria anymore. It will be no more united Iraq no more. This is, I want to just clarify this. Even if there will be international countries interference in this region, there will be no more one Iraq or one Syria anymore. Because the Kurdistan regions in these two countries have own right to rule themselves, to have their own government and army and parliament and and so on. And this is officially and this has officially been recognized by the international law and the other countries. I am sure you are aware of this. That the Rojava, which is the Kurdistan of Syria, being recognized officially, and Kurdistan of Iraq also been recognized officially. So there is no way that these two parts of Kurdistan will be under threat again. But of course, we are subject to any threat or punishment, as you see right now. We have to deal with it. We have to just be strong and deal with it. We already knew before the referendum we will have some consequences in a negative way, but we have to live with it and deal with it. Otherwise, no any nation on this planet have their own right and state and country if they are not going to sacrifice or not to be strong enough to hold on like we are going to do the same.